If you have a young tree in your yard that never quite took hold, that leafs out thin every spring and puts on no real growth, and sits there year after year looking like it is waiting for something, I want to tell you where that trouble very likely began. It began before you owned it. Here is the thing almost nobody knows about a tree bought in a plastic pot. That pot has a soil line, and every one of us reads that soil line as instruction. Whoever grew this tree knew what they were doing, so I will set it in the ground at the same depth it sat in the pot. That is careful thinking. That is what a reasonable person does, and on a great many container trees, that soil line is in the wrong place. The tree was already sitting too deep inside its own pot before it ever reached the garden center, and when you match that line in your yard, you do not undo the mistake. You make it permanent. And that is the hard part of this subject. Every other error a man makes in the yard shows itself in a season or two. This one does not. This one can sit quiet for 10 years, 15 years, and by the time the tree tells you something is wrong, it is a large tree with a large problem, and the cheap moment to fix it went by a very long time ago. So today I will show you the one line on a tree that actually matters. How to find it with your own 2 hands in about 2 minutes, and what to look at inside that root ball before you ever put a spade in the ground. This is worth knowing before you plant, and it is worth knowing before you buy. One line of business first. There is a free paper of 15 small fixes, $1 or less a piece, waiting under this video. Leave your name, and it comes to you. That is the whole of it. Now, the piece of knowledge this whole video stands on, and it costs you nothing but a minute of attention. Go and look at a big old tree, one that grew where it stands, out in a field or along a fence line. Look at the very bottom of it, where the trunk meets the ground. It does not go into the earth like a fence post. It swells. It widens out and flattens and spreads into the tops of the big roots, like a foot at the bottom of a leg. That widening is called the root flare, and the area right at the base of the trunk where it happens is called the root collar. That flare is not decoration. It is the part of the tree that is built to be in the air. The bark down there is trunk bark, made for sun and wind and drying out between rains. Root bark, the bark below it, is a different thing entirely, built for the dark and the damp. When you bury the flare, you take a piece of the tree that was made to breathe, and you pack wet soil against it and hold it there for years. Bark that stays wet does not stay sound, and the fine roots near the surface, the ones that do a great deal of the drinking, end up down where there is less air than they want. So here is the rule the extension people state as plainly as I can say it. When a tree is planted, that flare should be visible above the soil line, not level with it, visible. You should be able to walk up to a properly planted tree and see the trunk widen out before it goes into the ground. Go look at the trees in your own yard tonight. Some of them will show you that flare, and some of them will go into the ground straight as a telephone pole, and now you know what that means. If that was worth knowing, a like and a subscribe are welcome, and there is one old skill here every week. Now, why on earth would a nursery sell a tree sitting too deep in its own pot? Nobody did this to cheat you. It is just how the work goes. A container tree does not spend its life in the pot you carry to the truck. It gets moved up. It starts small, and as it grows, it is shifted into a bigger container, and then a bigger one after that. Every one of those moves is done fast, by hand, hundreds of trees in a day. And each time a tree is set into the new pot, it is very easy for it to end up sitting a little lower than it did before, with fresh growing medium filled in around the trunk. Do that 2 or 3 times over a few seasons, and you can bury the flare by 2 inches, 3 inches, sometimes more, without one person along the way doing anything careless. The extension people at Penn State say it plainly. All too often, trees and shrubs are planted a little bit deep in the container. And they say what that leads to. It causes more root defects,
And when the tree is then planted deeper still in the landscape, the root system often responds by growing upward and then circling or girdling the stem over time. So understand what you are actually holding when you carry that pot home. You are holding a tree, and a few inches of extra growing medium on top of it, and no way to tell one from the other by looking. The surface of that pot tells you where the nursery stopped filling. It does not tell you where the tree begins. Those are two different lines, and only one of them matters.
Here is how you find the true line. And this is the whole method, and it wants 2 minutes and no tools. When you get the tree home, before the hole is dug, lay the pot on its side and slide the container off. If it does not want to come, thump the rim and roll it a little. Set the root ball up where you can see it. Now look at the top of that root ball and mark the level in your mind, because that is the line the pot was telling you. That is the false line. And now start moving that topsoil away with your fingers. Loose growing medium comes away easily, an inch at a time, and you are feeling for one thing: the first major roots. Not the fine, hairy ones, the first thick roots that come off the trunk and run outward. Keep going gently until you find them. Where those first big roots leave the trunk, that is the top of the root flare. That is the true line. That is where this tree needs to meet the world. And now, look at the space between the two, between where the pot soil was and where those roots actually are. On some trees, it is nothing at all, and that is a well-grown tree and good for the fellow who raised it. On a great many others, it is 2 inches, 3, sometimes more than that. And every one of those inches is trunk that would have spent the rest of its life buried if you had trusted the pot. The people at Minnesota Extension put it as a plain instruction. It may be necessary to remove soil from the top of the root ball to locate the root flare. That sentence is doing a great deal of quiet work. It is telling you that the pot is not the authority. Your hands are. One honest note while we are here: this matters for trees. For shrubs, the extension guidance is easier. A shrub can generally be planted at the depth of its root ball, and hunting for a flare is not necessary. So do not go digging into every pot on the patio. This is a tree problem. While the pot is off, there is a second defect to look for, and it comes from the same place. A root in the ground grows outward until something stops it. A root in a pot grows outward until it hits plastic, and then it turns and follows the wall around and around. Do that for a couple of seasons, and the outside of that root ball becomes a mat of roots running in circles, and the trade calls that tree pot-bound. Here is why that matters years later. A trunk gets thicker every year of its life. A root that is wrapped around the trunk or the stem gets thicker too. Neither one can move out of the other's way, so they press. And the pressing goes on for a decade or more, slow and quiet, until that root is squeezing the trunk like a wire tie left on a growing branch. That is called a girdling root, and the Penn State Extension says where it ends. Several years after planting, these circling roots begin to girdle or strangle the stem or trunk and can ultimately kill the tree or shrub. That is the whole trouble with this subject in one sentence. Both defects were made in the pot. Both are cheap and easy to correct in the 10 minutes before planting. And both become expensive, difficult, or impossible once the tree is in the ground and growing. So look at the sides and the bottom of that root ball, not just the top. You are looking for roots running in circles, and you are looking for any root that crosses the trunk or wraps around it. Now the work, and none of it is hard. Start at the nursery. You are allowed to slide a tree out of its pot before you buy it, and any good garden center will let you. If the outside of that root ball is a solid mat of circling roots, set it down and look at another tree. Penn State says exactly that. And if you want to ask a useful question, ask whether they grow in containers that air prune the roots. because those pots are built to stop the circling before it starts. Correct the roots before planting. For a container tree, this is not delicate work, and that surprises folks. The research the extension services point to is clear. You can straighten crossing roots. You can remove them. You can slice down the sides of the root ball with a sharp knife or a handsaw or a spade, and cut roots regenerate quickly and grow out into your soil. The reason it does no harm is that a container tree still has 100% of its root system, unlike a field-dug tree that left a good share of its roots behind. So free those roots. A root ball that goes into the ground still shaped like the pot will often go on behaving like the pot. Dig wide and shallow. The hole wants to be about twice the width of the container and no deeper than it needs to be. Wide because that is where the roots are going. Shallow because loose soil under a root ball settles, and a tree that settles is a tree that sinks. Set the root ball on firm ground, not on fluff. Set the tree by the true line, not the pot line. The flare stays visible when the job is done. If your soil is heavy or wet, err on the high side rather than the low. Backfill with the soil you dug out. Firm it in so there are no big voids, and water it in. Water deeply and on a schedule. The guidance from Minnesota is 5 to 7 gallons at planting, and then 1 or 2 good deep waterings a week depending on rain and heat. Check the soil 4 to 8 inches down before you water again, because heavy clay holds water longer than it looks, and a new tree can be drowned as easily as dried out. Mulch, and mulch correctly. A ring about 2 inches thick and 3 to 4 feet wide, and here is the part people get backward. Keep it off the trunk. Do not pile it up against the bark in a cone. The extension people call that a mulch volcano, and it is exactly the same injury we have been talking about all video, only made out of mulch instead of soil. You just went to the trouble of finding that flare. Do not bury it again on the last step. And if you stake it, and most trees do not need it, take the stakes off after 1 year. One more before any digging. Call and have your utilities located first. It is free, it takes a few days, and there are lines in yards that nobody remembers putting there. In the United States, that call is 811. Now, what this method does and does not do, because I will not oversell you. A buried flare is not the reason every unhappy tree is unhappy. Species, rootstock, the quality of the nursery, your soil, your drainage, your climate, damage during planting, and the care a tree gets in its first 3 years all matter, and any one of them can be the trouble. What I have given you today removes 2 specific and very common defects. It does not guarantee you a tree. And here is the important line. Everything in this video is for a tree still in a pot, standing on your driveway, before it is planted. It is not instruction for a tree already in the ground. Do not go out and start excavating around the base of an established tree, and do not cut the major roots of a growing tree, on my say-so or anybody's. Root work on a mature tree can take away the very anchorage holding it up, and on a big tree, that is a safety matter, not a gardening matter. If you have a tree already in the ground that you believe is planted too deep, or that shows a root crossing hard against the trunk, or one that leans, or one you are simply worried about, that is the moment to bring in an ISA-certified arborist. That is a person who has been examined and certified to assess trees, and a visit costs a small fraction of removing a large tree that failed. There is no shame in the call. Knowing when a job has grown past your dooryard is part of the skill. Let me leave you with the thing about this subject that has stayed with me. Nearly everything we take care of around a house answers us quickly. Set a tool away wet, and it rusts by spring. Wash a shirt too hot, and it fades by summer. The house tells you, and you learn, and you do better. That is how a person gets handy. A tree does not work that way. A tree accepts what you do to it and says nothing for 15 years. The flare you buried this Saturday and the root you left circling send back no complaint at all. Not this year and not the next. And by the time the answer arrives, the man who planted it may not even be the one standing there to read it. So a tree asks a different kind of care than most things do. Not attention exactly. Something more like a decision made carefully for someone who is not in the room yet. 10 quiet minutes on a driveway with a pot on its side for a shade that arrives in 20 years for somebody else. That is a good trade, and it is very nearly free, and near enough, nobody makes it. So here is what I would like to know from you, and it takes one walk around the yard. Go and stand at the base of the biggest tree you planted yourself. Does the trunk widen out and spread before it enters the ground, or does it go in straight like a post? Tell me which one you found, and tell me roughly how long ago you planted it. I read every one. God keep you, friend. We will talk again.